Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. My name is Farhana Husseini. I am the Director of Programs and Climate Initiatives at Waterfront Alliance. Today's webinar is entitled Navigating the Waterfront, a deep dive into the Waterfront Alliance's Access Guide. This webinar will review our newly launched guide entitled Public Access Along Your Waterfront, a how-to guide. And this provides a step-by-step overview for anyone who's interested in advocating for their local waterfront parcel. This guide is based on several years of Waterfront Alliance's advocacy, as well as learnings from important organizations doing similar advocacy, such as South Bronx Unite and Kayak Staten Island. I am going to drop the link to this guide in the chat, so all of you can have access to this as well. It should now be in the chat. It is my absolute honor to introduce you to our panelists today. I'd love to introduce you to Michael Johnson, who is the founding member and advisory board member of South Bronx Unite. Michael has a long-standing track record in community-based advocacy for environmental and economic justice. Michael is the co-founder of South Bronx Unite, a coalition of residents, organizations, and allies confronting policies that perpetuate harm and building support for viable community-driven solutions in the South Bronx. He's also co-founded the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards as a proactive community land trust designated to advance community ownership of public land for public good. I'm really excited to have you here, Michael. Thank you for being on. I'm also honored to introduce Annette Pierce, who is the co-director of Kayak Staten Island. She is here leading Kayak Staten Island with an unswerving commitment to safety, a love of nature, and a dedication to community. Annette, who's been with Kayak Staten Island since 2007, brings over 2008. Brings over a decade of nonprofit and social justice experience and considers community her medium. When she's not practicing welding, out for a run, growing things in her tiny balcony, or making waves in the radio studio, she can be found happily wearing a few different hats for Kayak Staten Island. Annette, honor to have you here. Thank you for being here as well. And finally, we have Ray Fusco, who is the owner of Hudson Canyon Consulting. He's a seasoned professional with extensive experience in the maritime industry, waterfront development, and outdoor recreation. He's the founder of Hudson Canyon Consulting, a firm dedicated to enhancing public access to waterfronts and promoting sustainable coastal development. Ray has been a friend to Waterfront Alliance for many, many years, and we are very thrilled to have him join us and participate in a lot of the work that we're doing today. So thank you so much, Ray, for being here as well. On the next slide, you'll see Waterfront Alliance's mission. Waterfront Alliance is a US-based nonprofit organization with a growing alliance of more than 1,100 partners and a shared goal: to bring about real change to shorelines, waterfronts, and coastlines across the nation and in the New York, New Jersey region. We advocate for increased waterfront access, climate resilience, both environmental and economic, vulnerable communities, and water and science-based education. Together, we build and we lead the way for thriving and resilient waterfronts, shorelines, and coastlines. Through efforts like this guide, Waterfront Alliance provides tools to communities that they can use to help shape the future of our waterfronts and region. On the next slide, you'll see some of the ways that we do this. We do this through advocacy for things like ferry access. We support the Rise to Resilience Coalition, which is a coalition of over 100 different organizations making climate resilience a policy priority. We do this through convening, through things like this webinar, as well as our conference. And in this bottom picture here, you'll actually see Annette on the on the water herself, with Kayak Staten Island and supporting waterfront access and recreation. We also do this through supporting things like infrastructure and resilience infrastructure and design, as well as education. And on the next slide, we'll do a deep dive into our work in public access. So since its founding, Waterfront Alliance has been an advocate for equitable waterfront access, through taking essentially a combined data-driven decision-making, robust community engagement, strategic partnerships to advance projects that really enhance waterfront access, promote climate resilience, and foster environmental stewardship. This started in 2007 with our flagship program called the City of Water Day. And now in its 18th year, City of Water Day takes place actually this year on July 12th. It's a Saturday, and it is essentially a region-wide day organized by Waterfront Alliance and the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, to champion a climate resilient New York and New Jersey harbor. And there is still time to apply for funding for your City of Water Day event. And I'll actually post the link in the chat if you're interested in applying for funding for City of Water Day. In 2016, moving forward, Waterfront Alliance established the development of the Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines. With the help of hundreds of experts in design, science, community development, engineering, and insurance, Waterfront Alliance developed WEDGE, which is a science-based voluntary rating system and a set of guidelines to address the challenges of waterfront design at the project scale. WEDGE works with project teams to maximize the value of a site through resilience, ecology, and access. In 2019, a public access task force, which was led by Waterfront Alliance, Hudson Estuary Program, and Hester Street Collaborative, that included more than 60 organizations, with the experience ranging from environmental justice advocacy to urban planning and design, essentially led to the development of the Waterfront Access for All report in 2020. I'm going to drop the link for that report in the chat as well. And you'll see that here. In 2022, actually, Ray, who's on our call right now, helped Waterfront Alliance develop a new study that was focused on activating New York City-owned waterfront sites for recreation and access. Also going to drop this in the chat, so you can now have all of our guides and reports in one space. And this project developed a rubric to help identify 4 city-owned waterfront sites that were ready or had the right qualities to be transformed into a safe, well-managed, and publicly accessible waterfronts in the near term. And over the past 3 years, Waterfront Alliance has been working towards deep advocacy for 2 of these sites, which is the Lincoln Avenue Street End in the South Bronx and the Front Street along North Shore of Staten Island. Which brings us here today. Our goal is to share some of our findings and learnings through some of the deep advocacy that we utilized for, gosh, almost 2 decades around public access. And on the next slide, you'll see sort of what this guide provides. So this new guide essentially is a vision for the 520 miles of shoreline. New York and New Jersey Harbor offers significant recreational, environmental, social, and economic benefits to the region. Yet access to these valuable waterfront resources are not equally distributed. This guide presents 2 detailed case studies of the Waterfront Alliance's work with Kayak Staten Island and South Bronx Unite to activate 2 of these priority sites. Working with South Bronx Unite, really understanding how the work of collaboration between many different organizations led by South Bronx Unite to establish the deep advocacy required to increase waterfront access and amenities. That's the first case study. And the second case study is exploring how Front Street parking lot in Staten Island showcases how to leverage the incredible work of Kayak Staten Island's existing programming and community engagement to develop a vision for a revitalized waterfront space. Drawing from these case studies, the guide provides practical guidance for community organizations in seeking to activate waterfront parcels. It also emphasizes the importance of understanding a very specific context in which a waterfront site, including its history, environmental and resilience challenges, and community demographics, can really shape how the advocacy should be made. The guide also provides a roadmap for transforming underutilized waterfront spaces into vibrant, accessible, and equitable assets for all. On the next slide, we'll start walking you through some of these steps. So really, these steps can be broken down into 4 questions. Understanding what do you want, essentially defining your vision and building support. The second question is, where do you want it? Really, essentially identifying and understanding your site. The third question is, how do you convince others? Really completing a significant advocacy plan and engagement, as well as trying to get funding to move it all forward. And then the last question is, how do you keep it alive? Really thinking about long-term management and sustainability. And with that, I'm going to now pass it off to Ray to take us into a deep dive into these steps. Go to the next slide.
Thank you, Farhana, and welcome everyone. Excited to be speaking with you today. I will say that, while this guide gives us a tremendous amount of information and outlines guidance on how to do this, it takes some time and some persistence to get the right information, to build the right buy-in, and to get where we're going. So I'll start that just from the beginning. Define your vision, as Farhana mentioned. So what does your community want at this particular piece of waterfront parcel? We've seen a lot of pictures of kayaks in many of these slides, but it could be as simple as an outdoor placemaking space where people want to congregate near the waterfront, near the water's edge. Maybe it's some environmental programming and some educational programming, some citizen science water quality testing. There's a variety of ways to engage with the water and engage with the waterfront. There's also, of course, canoe and kayak launching and boating programs that can be established. It really depends on what the community and some of the community partners have in mind to best utilize the piece of parcel, the parcel of land. Identify vacant, underutilized. So I think ultimately what parcel of land is, or what parcel of waterfront in your community is not being utilized as you may see it or envision it potentially being utilized? Is there enough room for some upland staging for some sort of educational programming or something? Are you in a location where it's safe and comfortable to be able to access the water so that, there isn't heavy vessel traffic flowing back and forth, and it is a place where you could safely get access to the water? There's lots of considerations there. And what does the waterfront look like? Is it big riprap, or is it a soft shoreline, or is it a bulkhead that might need some other sort of design? So I think taking some of those ideas into consideration as they tie into what a potential vision looks like are helpful. I can't stress enough this community-led design. These projects work best when many voices are speaking to how the community wants to use and how they could potentially use this waterfront. We want everyone to have access, and everyone's vision is super important in these things, because you never know what your next great idea is going to be to foster some programming or educational element at the water's edge if you don't have more people there. I think it's incredibly important from a community perspective to bring in many voices. It's just far better that way. And I think longer term, you have a much stronger convincing commitment when the entire community is behind you. And that ties in deeply with the community's needs. There's probably many other community partners and folks who are doing things throughout the community. And where do they have some areas where they would like to expand or to support? And could that kind of programming take place at the water's edge? And could they see themselves working on programming at the water's edge, whether those are churches or community groups or other nonprofits? That's an important piece of this as well. Next slide. So this slide is one of the tougher ones, I will say, and I will quote a dear friend: "The ox is slow, but the earth is patient." Finding and identifying the boundaries of some of these parcels, identifying ownership, and certainly identifying easements can take some time. There's a tremendous amount of public-facing information, taxation, block and lots. There's information on CSOs, their exact location and how much throughput they have. City planning has a tremendous amount of public-facing information on community demographics and parcel ownership and zoning and everything that goes along with that. So starting there to understand where your small piece of waterfront fits into a larger parcel and who owns it is a really important step. Finding easements and identifying easements can take a little bit of time. That's a nuanced conversation. With our work with Lincoln Avenue for many years, at low tide on several occasions, you could see a variety of cable crossings coming into the site. There's also the Oak Point rail yard that goes through. And so there's right there, we learned it was Con Ed, Verizon, and CSX that had easements to this, fairly small piece of land at the water's edge. And that as we had conversations, we had to take into consideration what their needs were and how to maintain that piece of infrastructure that was Con Ed cables at the location. And so it's incredibly important to understand that because it really drives who are some of the city agencies, regulatories, and partners that you should have conversations with to better understand this. Many of the parcels in public-facing data will give you a city agency that's the owner. And so conversations starting with them and trying to unpack, where this fits into the city ecosystem is incredibly important. Finding the funding for a site survey, that's always tricky. Funding is always tricky, as we know, trying to expand our waterfronts. The Waterfront Alliance has been incredibly successful with some estuary grants to help us uncover some of the nuances of some of these properties. Again, tying into the partners at Lincoln Avenue, a local landowner in waste management had recently done some survey work and some borings at the site to start some waterfront restoration work. And because of the relationship that South Bronx Unite has with waste management and that strong partnership, they felt comfortable sharing some survey data directly that tied to this Lincoln Avenue site, which was incredibly helpful for us, having to not go through the process of procuring a survey company and acquiring that data was incredibly helpful. So again, partnerships and finding ways to get information, super important. Could be cost savings, beneficial. I think that ties into the next slide as well. So coalition, community partners, elected officials, I would say that with a lot of the work that we have done, and certainly I have done with the Waterfront Alliance over the years, we've received a tremendous amount of goodwill and positive conversations with elected officials. I think everyone understands the value of the waterfront and its incredible importance, 520 miles and literally an archipelago of 18, I think is the count, maybe 20 islands around New York City. It's incredibly important. And so elected officials are people that are important. They can often help find and locate funding. Sometimes they have discretionary funding, which can be allocated to projects, which is incredibly important. You really want to have them and have them understand that your community wants something special at your particular parcel of waterfront. Building the coalition, as I mentioned earlier, a broad coalition from the community, other nonprofits, civic organizations, schools, libraries, churches, others that could help talk to and speak to what the community wants and to drive quality programming at the water's edge. Quality programming could mean a lot and can be a lot. So defining that is important, and having the community on board is truly important. And that ties into the design and the vision and the design. How much space is there? How could we use it? How would we like to use it? What would we need to do to get it to where it's usable? Is there a lot for us to do? Is there a little for us to do? Gaining community input. Sometimes there are community organizations are already bringing their community together. I know that both Kayak Staten Island and South Bronx United have done a great job of bringing their community to the water's edge and surveying their community partners to truly understand what that looks like. And I think that's a powerful tool. And I think all of this leads to this beginning of the advocacy of this coalition and really establishing a path for success through advocacy and community buy-in. And also to create this compelling case to say this would be important and this would open up, this certain spot along the waterfront, and there isn't another spot on the waterfront for 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles where the community could have access. And this is why this is so incredibly important. And it's even more important because this particular community has never had access or traditionally is underserved in a variety of reasons, and waterfront access is one of them. Next slide. This arguably could be one of the most important pieces, is this short-term, long-term management maintenance. It's easy or easy-ish to try to get someone to agree that a parcel of land could be a place where you could advocate and provide access. But the conversation always has to come back to who and how will maintain it short-term, long-term, and who and how will it be funded to do that. City parks, city agencies, and boroughs do not need unfunded mandates at locations like this. And I think it's incredibly important to think about making sure that as part of the process, we find ways to get community partners to be prepared to be in an agreement with a city agency, potentially to have an MOU to be able to be the steward of this site and secure funding through some method or mechanism to make sure that the maintenance of it and the cleaning of it and keeping all of it safe is important. I think it's really important. And I think it's often the piece that comes at the very end of the process, but I think it's something that should be considered earlier than that because it's critically important to being able to truly get to the end, which is opening access. Secure funding, I think this is something that the Waterfront Alliance has been working on for a very long time, and I think still is an ongoing challenge, is to find the right kind of funding to open up access and to provide the kind of work it takes to get the different elements to open access paid for to be done, whether that's architectural renderings, site survey, borings for site and earth qualities. There's a lot that goes on there to get the waterfront parcels open, and across several phases, it takes money. And of course, getting to a concept design. So I think it's easy to get the first rendering or two and get the community to start, providing feedback on what those renderings look like. But I think getting to a more tangible design takes a little bit of time and is the next phase once you've got some funding and got some community feedback. Persistence, important. Back to my ridiculous saying, which I love a lot, the ox is slow, but the earth is patient. This thing takes time, and it's important to go into this understanding that it's going to take some time, but it's for the benefit of the community and is powerfully important, truly powerfully important. And then develop structure for overseeing stewardship. I think that ties into long-term maintenance, whether that's one community organization or multiple. I think it's important to make sure we understand what that structure is. It can also start early on with volunteer cleanups and bringing volunteers out to the site to help clean up sites. Often there's different pieces of flotsam and jetsam that gets washed up onto the shore. So creating just simple mechanisms like that can start to develop a structure long-term for overseeing stewards. I think we're on to the next slide.
Right. Thank you, Ray. Thanks for taking us through that extensive sort of multiple different steps on how to do this work. For the audience, there is a Q&A chat. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it into the Q&A box, or drop it into the chat as well. Happy to take any questions, and we'd love to engage with all of you. But now we'd love to have a conversation with Michael Johnson, who has been doing incredible work around advocating for the Mott Haven Port Morris waterfront plan. Um, we'll open it up to a couple of questions with you, Michael, and if the audience has any questions, would love to also engage. But I'll start with just if you can share a little bit more about how the Mott Haven Port Morris waterfront plan was developed, and how did you develop the vision for the plan?
Oh, well, thank you for Hannah and Ray for you know, creating this platform for us to have this discussion about what we had to do and what we felt was important as a community to access and to create kind of a plan for a space that will provide so much to our community. Why did it happen? Because, like Ray had mentioned, existing access does not exist. We knew how important, and we do know how important it is to be in green space and by nature and close to water, the water's edge, and being in a community that I live in that only has one real park for 60,000 people in a 2.5 square mile radius. The need for green space is forever present. Um, we talked a bit about the health outcomes of the community because of the South Bronx. I think it's pretty well known that uh, we're part of the most unhealthy county of all 62 counties in New York State. We lead the way because of our environmental burdens that we shoulder and carry. And so, when we see the lack of access, we see a peninsula that we live in that's built out with development that does not allow us to get to that natural resource. We use the same plan you talked about, and we opened up and had your slides of why and where and how. Um, we knew it was important that for our quality of life, for us to have access like everyone else has, and equitable access like it's afforded to other communities, we would need to create it ourselves. We need to come together as a community, in which we did. Goes back to your asset mapping and looking at what are available open spaces that we could underutilized space that we could actually create a plan. But it really came about after Sandy, real importance because of what happened to most of New York City in terms of the flooding that occurred. We all know Sandy was only a superstorm; it wasn't a hurricane. But we still got severe flooding throughout New York City. The Bronx was hit at low tide and still took on 4.5 feet of water, blocks away from the water's edge, especially at Lincoln Avenue. So we knew the importance there, not just have recreation, but flood mitigation, that we need to protect our community from what was to come, knowing that there'll be more of these types of storms.
It's very helpful. Thanks for setting the stage and for sort of providing a little bit of that context. Would love to hear more about what ways did South Bronx Unite and you, Michael, engage the community to sort of create that vision?
It's easy to come to identify and collect and bring people together on a problem. It's much more difficult to create the solution collectively, but we knew we had to come together and really bring people together in our public spaces like community gardens, where we did envisioning sessions. We put out maps on the table and said, here's our waterfront area. Here's where we don't have access. Where can we create it? And so, um, we multiple opportunities bringing people together within environmental justice bike tours. I had a photo I saw there on your slide when I was a much younger man doing EJ bike tours with folks who live in the community, shown in these various access points, which we can actually create something with, that we can create something better than is existing, thinking out the box for our health and well-being. So the problem of lack of access was there. We even brought students from local schools. We gave them questions about, do you know you live in a waterfront community? And most did not. And we'd do tours. We'd walk them to that water's edge in places. And we had two really access points in which we could get people there. One in which you had to go across the rail line at Lincoln Avenue, and the other you had to go up to a fence, to a burned out pier at the 132nd Street and pier, we call it, the East River, where it was charred and burned out. So we conducted many bike tours, environmental justice tours, by foot, by bike, some by bus, just getting folks on the water's edge, and then bring them to those green spaces where we could identify those spaces and then start trying to create a viable plan together.
So this is very helpful in trying to sort of envision how you create a community-led plan. Now what, right? What were some of the obstacles that you had with activating this community-led plan?
Before the obstacles, I want to say about the benefits. We were fortunate to realize that there was a New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Open Space Committee. And I was nominated to be a part of that, to make sure that as a resident of the South Bronx, but also involved in environmental justice work, already half a decade, our organization, before the creation of the Waterfront Plan, just advocating for environmental justice that got us a position on the Waterfront Advisory Open Space Committee, on the Open Space Committee. It also got us on the New York City Waterfront Management Advisory Board. So we're able to then leverage not only our place at that table, to bring forth not only our plan, but other plans that need to have some recognition of need, for either being a priority project or a project of importance. And we've seen the importance of those kind of designations. Never had that been one before in the South Bronx for any peninsula project. So we were successful in really bringing our plan together and nominating it, and then it actually became prioritized. That was a real bone there for it to become a prioritized waterfront plan by the state. And we also nominated other plans in the Bronx and across the 5 boroughs to be nominated as priority projects that had never been before. So we were trying to give communities like ours the opportunity to also receive the equitable access they have not been afforded to in the past. And those 2 committees allowed us to do that. But the obstacles, of course, is always getting political will, which you really need. So just having prioritized is not enough. You have to have a really strong project, really well thought out, it has to be shovel ready, it has to be funded, and it has to have support first and foremost by your elected officials. So that took some organizing our elected officials to understanding the need, and then the potential solution. And Sandy, opened a lot of eyes to what the vulnerability was to our community. But the high rates of asthma, obesity, diabetes, lack of recreational space, lack of nature-based solutions, so the knowing climate change and climate impacts will indirectly impact our community like it did Lower Manhattan. Only we were fortunate were hit by low tide. So we were able to start to navigate the political spectrum and really move and open up folks' eyes, meaning elected officials, about the need for not only recreation, but also flood mitigation.
I really appreciate you sharing some of these strategies for advocacy and also, some of the obstacles that you've sort of encountered. There are, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other organizations trying to sort of activate their own local waterfront parcels. What recommendations would you have for other organizations doing similar work or even just starting out?
Yeah, I really like where you all started off at, identifying what you want, the steps to activate local waterfront, parcels. If you see there's the lack of access, or there's a need, there's a problem, and then there's steps in which you should take collectively to identify how you can solve it. And the more you can bring people together to do that, the more you have that local, like I call it professionalism, the experts who are living out the injustices, and really have real ideas about what the solutions can be. I mean, we actually learned from a gentleman who's right now 92 years old, who actually is an architect by trade and was really drawing these things out by hand. And I still have some of his original drawings. His dream for what Lincoln Avenue could be, way before we start thinking about it. And there's others who are saying, I got goosebumps just thinking about Juan Carlos, who I'm talking about now. I'm bringing him up in this conversation, because those are the experts. Those are the folks who have dreamed about this. We have kids who've grown up here who used to go through what was a rail yard to get to the Bronx Kill by any means necessary, just so they could swim in that water body, but didn't have no access to it. They made their access, but they also were professionals. They were the experts. They knew the need existed, and we became empowered by their experiences, and brought them walking shoulder to shoulder, not on their shoulders, but standing shoulder to shoulder. Others like Harry Bubbins, which Ray Fosco knows very well, a pioneer in the South Bronx for access and green space acquisition, and creation, knowing that for healthy outcomes to exist, these people are the ones who are living in these communities that are thriving for these opportunities to come to bear, for the seeds to be planted for future opportunities for, if not them, others. And as Ray mentioned, it does take persistence. I'm not 92 like Juan Carlos is, but it takes time. I'm half his age. I'm a little bit more than half his age, but it's okay as long as we keep planting those seeds. And the waterfront site in which Waterfront Waste Management, had rebuilt the bulkheads. This past summer, we planted trees there with the borough president. Never before has trees been planted there, for the benefit of the community, because of the urban heat island effect. How these sites are so valuable for for quality of life, especially for the folks in our community who have so many devastating pre-existing health conditions.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing these words of wisdom, but also for all of your service and all of your support to the community over so many years. Thank you for sharing, and really, again, really appreciate you being here and appreciate your partnership with this work as well.
My pleasure.
Would love to now turn to Annette, and some of the amazing work that Annette and Kayak Staten Island has been doing as well, particularly around getting the community to the local waterfront, engaging the community on the water, and then through that work, being able to do some incredible advocacy. Annette would love to hear more about how Kayak Staten Island actually got involved in advocacy around Front Street.
Sure. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the call, for HANA Waterfront Alliance. And Michael, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on calls with you too, because I learn so much every time I'm in rooms with you. So appreciate everything you're doing and your thoughts. Can everybody hear me okay too? All right, I'm in a warehouse. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with kind of the unique landscape of Staten Island. We are the greenest borough in all of New York City, and we also have amazing, amazing waterfronts and beautiful coastlines here. And one of the things that's relatively obvious from the jump is that from about the Alice Austin House south, there is no shortage of water access for communities in those areas in Staten Island. Whereas when you go further north, which not coincidentally, folks are experiencing socioeconomic hardship. It is a more ethnically diverse area, Black and brown neighborhoods predominantly. The lack of water access is saliently just not like a thing. So our whole MO as an organization is to make a water sport that's cost prohibitive for a lot of people accessible to everyone. So it's really an equity mission at heart. I'm one of those people. I showed up on the scene at Kayak Staten Island in 2008 because, you know, I have a New York City apartment that's this big, so I have no room to store a boat. I don't have a car to haul one around. I couldn't afford a kayak at the time. So I was the person that benefited tremendously from having access to kayaking. And so it has really inspired me, as I've stayed involved with Kayak Staten Island for 16 years now, to ensure that that is something that everybody, you know, kind of regardless of their neighborhood, their socioeconomic status, can access. So it was a strong community partnership that actually sort of compelled us to really start seeing if we could bring our program up to the North Shore. We're a very small volunteer-run grassroots organization. We're just folks living in the community. I live about 2 miles away from here. Where I'm sitting in this location is literally blocks from our launch site at Front Street, you know, the one we're referencing in this call. So very embedded in the community. Been here for a very long time, and I'm very aware of the fact that we have incredible natural resources and natural waterfronts in this community, and it's a missed opportunity on a lot of fronts for neighbors here to not be able to access this in their own neighborhood and enjoy it, reap all the benefits, the health benefits, like Michael mentioned. And then from an environmental stewardship perspective too, where I sit right now actually was under about 6 feet of water when Hurricane Sandy hit. So Stapleton, Clifton was ravaged by Sandy. So the importance of, you know, resilience and all of the work that you do, Waterfront Alliance, and, you know, everybody who's in this MILO and doing this work, really can't be overstated, especially these days. So that really compels us to, and it may sound kind of oversimplified, but, you know, when you have people directly experiencing the natural resources in their neighborhoods, it inspires them to care personally in a way that kind of talking about, you know, the threats to the environment in sort of an abstract or academic way can't really do. You know, so when we bring folks who've never been in a kayak, who've never been in water, who've never experienced their island and their neighborhood, out onto the water to experience it, it really is kind of a paradigm shift in how they're relating, you know, kind of to their local environment, to their neighborhood, to the incredible waterfront resources we have here in Staten Island. So the long and short of it is we saw a need, we saw a disparity in access. We are just so driven to serve the community by making what we do accessible that it was just kind of natural that we found ourselves in this advocacy space. So.
Thank you, Annette. That's very helpful. And I think a lot of organizations may kind of sort of feel the same way as you, but may not know how to take that next step. And would love to sort of get a sense from you how Kayak Staten Island sort of engaged the community in shaping what this parcel of land could sort of look like.
Yeah, well, I can't say it as well as Michael did, but in short, to really center and draw on the experience and the wisdom of the community. You know, to not come in and say, hey, we're doing a thing, but to be arm in arm with the folks who live here, who have lived here for generations, who shop here, who thrive here, who struggle here, everything. So that means getting out and boots on the ground and talking to neighbors. We have done a lot of that actually, since James and I have really been doing our best to extend our reach beyond our networks and not just kind of have an echo chamber within our friends and community. It really has been just a lot of conversations with regular folks who live here about what they want to see. If we see anybody, you know, on the shoreline doing anything, we might run up to them and start talking to them. And really just organically being in these spaces and having an ear on the ground and knowing what is making people unhappy, knowing what folks want. And then building strong community partnerships too. And in Staten Island, that's been particularly salient and important because of the fact that, you know, we operate 2 different programs here in 2 different geographic locations here, and they're very, very different demographically and politically and everything. So ensuring that we are building coalition with community partners and organizations that represent the communities that we are working in and that we are trying to serve. So Kayak Staten Island is part of our newly formed Environmental Justice Coalition here in Staten Island. We work directly with organizations who are led by and serve communities of color. So in doing that, we're ensuring that folks know that this is for them and this benefits them and this benefits their local environment, their health, their well-being, their experience in their neighborhood. So at the risk of sounding like over simplistic or naive, just that altruism, you know, like really wanting what's best for our neighbors, I think really goes a long way.
That's very helpful. And I think you already sort of went into a little bit of what advocating for your local community looks like as well. As you've been advocating, what similar question to Michael, what kinds of obstacles have you encountered in your advocacy?
Well, it is a very dynamic time right now on the North Shore of Staten Island. There's a lot of really incredible shoreline revitalization and redevelopment happening right now, which is wonderful for the neighborhood. And, you know, a huge legislative victory for different politicians and stakeholders, and ensuring that we do our best to continue to represent the desires and the best interests of folks that are living here in the community, and collaborating, you know, with everything that's going on here that is going to revitalize the shoreline and really, hopefully, bring forth the full potential of this beautiful shoreline we have here on the North Shore. And we just want to make sure that folks have access to the water here, you know, and that folks can continue to use their waterfront recreationally and continue to have ownership over it, you know, because it is their neighborhood. So just making sure that we're all communicating, we're all working hand in hand. You know, Ray kind of mentioned that there are a lot of different agencies involved, different stakeholders. So ensuring we're all on the same page. Staten Island is the only borough that doesn't have a boathouse. And we think that this is a really incredible time to work with everybody that is invested in the betterment of this waterfront in this area, in this North Shore corridor, to all get on the same page about that. And what would be wonderful about something like that too, is that not only would it be something that folks who live here currently and folks who have lived here for generations have ownership of, you know, and are involved in the planning of and involved in, you know, it's theirs. Essentially, it is their boathouse. It would be their neighborhood boathouse. So it would be for current neighbors. And then if there are new folks coming in, it's for them too, you know, so it's just a really incredible opportunity for all of the agencies and everybody who is working for the betterment of this neighborhood to get on the same page and really, really serve our neighbors in a way that is, I think, very necessary. We have some of the best shorelines in New York City, like no offense to anybody else. We kind of have bragging rights about that, I think. So it would be a shame to not figure out a way to really maximize the potential for that for our communities and our neighbors.
And then final question, Annette, for you. There are lots of other organizations that are similar to yours that are doing this amazing recreational programming and bringing, you know, communities to the water who may also want to be involved in activating their local parcel of land.
Mm-hmm.
What recommendations would you have?
Yeah, similar to what Michael said and what I'd mentioned before, just really drawing on the wisdom and experience of the communities that you want to work in. Really understanding what it is that people want, what they lack, what they need, and boots on the ground, you know, having conversations with individuals, going to the community board meetings, going to the civic association meetings like we have, you know, and making connections, and not like in a necessarily like contrived way, but just in a like, hey, we're here for you. You know, how can we best serve you? How can we put our connections and our vision, you know, how can we put it to best use to serve you and to serve the local environment? So that's kind of my maybe overly simplified answer, and of course, making connections with elected officials and other stakeholders. And having these conversations that will really, hopefully end in something extraordinarily positive for the community and for the local environment.
I really appreciate this, Annette. I think one of the things that both you and Michael have emphasized is this idea of community-led ideas and visioning and representing community and community voices, which I think is really powerful. But also this idea of persistence and patience. And unfortunately, this is, this is a long game. And I think Ray highlighted it really well that this is going to take some time. Both of you have been at this for a very long time, and Annette, for you, we are in awe of how you are able to do this as a volunteer organization, a volunteer-led organization, and you are providing an incredible service for a lot of communities in the North Shore of Staten Island. So thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your wisdom, but also for all of your service as well. I'll now pass it off to Ray on the next slide to sort of share a little bit more about some of the key considerations of the guide, and also just consolidating some of the thoughts that both Annette and Michael have shared today.
Thanks, Farhana. I think to bring all this together, I think some of these elements will run on the same timeline and in parallel with other things that are going on in this. I think when you're talking about building partnerships, and I think when you're talking about understanding what's happening across your landscape, Annette made a wonderful comment about all of the wonderful revitalization of the Stapleton waterfront, making sure you're understanding what's happening within projects within your community. And so development projects, waterfront projects, and you can gain a lot of that information is by being engaged in the community boards. Many of the community boards have a waterfront committee, and I think it's important to be engaged with them and to see what's happening across your area through the community board lens. It's really important. Timelines and adaptability, we've said this takes some time. Sometimes it goes very quickly and then it stalls over an item or two that need to have things get worked out, like easements or cable crossings and other things where it takes more conversations and more complexities around what that means. So sometimes the timeline seems to be going beautifully well, and then sometimes you seem to be stalled. But I think as long as you're persistent, as we've talked about, I think it's important to keep things moving. And maybe with the adaptability piece, you can have other elements moving in parallel while you're waiting for something to come to fruition. Understanding specific contexts. I think as we look at all the different complexities of the waterfront, and as we understand each individual element and where it sits in the broader scheme of opening access and serving the community, your one small piece of waterfront may have incredibly important contextual elements to you, but as people are looking on a much broader scale, they may not see it that way. And understanding the specifics around where your piece sits and what other interests are coming together for the betterment of your community and maybe along a 2, 3, 4, 5 mile stretch of waterfront is also incredibly important. And making sure you understand that well as you're building partners and building a plan and that coalition and advocacy. Holding a community charrette. I think Michael's organization has done this incredibly well. He talked about having people at community gardens and bringing people together to really look at pictures and designs and riff off of them. Bringing the community together is always a good thing. And, getting direct feedback from them is always a good thing. And it pays huge dividends long term. And I think that's all I have for Hannah. Do we have time for Q&A?
We do indeed, and happy to actually stop sharing the slides, and jump into. We have one question so far, and happy to sort of share the question, and we can talk about. I think between all four of us, we can talk about how to address this question. So the question is, the major challenges we face in many of our locations are, one, as small volunteer-led organizations, we don't always have the capacity to negotiate with waterfront landowners, especially city agencies, in the ways they typically work. And the second one is funding for initial development. It's hard to find funding. Does the guide have advice on how to address any of these? And what I'd love to actually share is the space with all of you to see if you have any advice on how to address some of these capacity issues.
No, of course, that's very, very good questions. I mean, we were all volunteer led until 3 years ago, and we were able to hire staff because of our work around environmental justice. But for the waterfront plan, it's been just building collaborations with different institutions, like especially universities and from MIT, Pratt, UPenn, and most often, and then we got some grants to help fund some TA assistance. We recently went for a EPA community change grant, which paid for TA assistance, where we were able to also do charrettes. So I think there are some grant availabilities for this work. I think it's always really good to utilize pro bono or low bono if you can, and get institutions to help. Especially landscape architectural schools are really helpful with trying to help you put your ideas and your community's ideas to paper. We were really successful in doing that with several different institutions, so we could really better able to shop around to our elected officials what it could look like and its viability and why it's important. And even to the local community boards, making presentations of them with these now these renderings we have. So it's a building up and it's a leading to being able to then fund, if not acquisition, activation. And I think that comes with its own challenges, of course, but then the more you keep building on those seeds of planting this plan you have, the more it grows and metastasizes. And I think it just naturally creates opportunities that will lead to something else. And we're still trying to build out our plan that was prioritized in 2016, right, by the state. But just of recent, because we applied for this community change grant with the EPA, we now have a much more solid application, Ray can tell you. So we have more kind of collaboration with institutions, with entities, state and city entities we never had before. And federal, Army Corps of Engineers, right? State, city DEPs, state DEC, EDC, who was going to activate our site and maintain it. Like we've had now collaborations that we never had before. So I think that all came from this community vision, and then working with collaboration with institutions to build out what our plan should look like. So never all at once. It's going to be incremental. It's not a video game. It's going to be like, take time, and that's okay. Because the more you put into it, the more time it takes, the more it's going to shape and mold and really bring those experts in those communities together.
If I could contribute, thank you, Michael, that was brilliant. If I could contribute on the capacity building, and I think Michael alluded to this, as a small volunteer organization working with other small volunteer community partners and working together and sharing bandwidth among a few small community partners can be helpful and empowering. So finding other like-minded community partners to help with that. I would also say from a funding perspective, don't underestimate what small community fundraisers could do and how a little bit of money could potentially go a long way. I think Michael's point about pro bono, low bono, and even if you go after a couple of grants and if they need just to have a few $1,000s as matching funds, if you could, I mean, small fundraiser to raise a couple of $1,000s as a capacity building fund, like that shows a lot of earnest and can help unlock some community grants in that fashion.
That's very helpful. And I'm so sorry that it's now 1 o'clock, a little bit past 1 o'clock, but this was an excellent conversation, and just to be mindful of everyone's time, we'll sort of end here. But thank you, Michael, Annette, Ray, for joining today. We will be sending out the recording for everyone who has registered. And we also wanted to share quick next steps for the guide. We will be hosting office hours for any organization that is interested in questions like this, and learning more about capacity building, learning more about the guide itself, and how we all can support you with activating your local waterfront parcel. So in the recording email, we will send out more details about the office hours as well. But thank you so much all for being here, and it was such a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Partners in Access, thank you.
That's right. Thanks. Take care.
Take care now.